Scuttlebutt, how it works, and some background. I will walk through some of the clients. I'll talk through some of the core concepts and philosophy of Scuttlebutt, since it's quite different to traditional kinds of apps. And I will talk about some of the things that might happen in the future. So what is Secure Scuttlebutt, or SSB for short? Scuttlebutt is slang for gossip. It's a sailor term. The butt refers to like a cask of sometimes water, and scuttling it is when you open it to drink from it. So it's essentially the water cooler on a ship, and that's why Scuttlebutt means gossip. And Secure Scuttlebutt is a gossip protocol, which I will get into more later. But yeah, Secure Scuttlebutt is basically cryptographically secured gossip. So it has some of the properties of gossip, that it travels from person to person, but it doesn't degrade over time, since we use, for instance, digital signatures. And some of the words that I would use to describe it, I will get into them more later, is that it's off-grid, offline first, non-commercial, non-hierarchical, social, and delay tolerant. Scuttlebutt was originally created in around 2014 by Dominic Tarr. He lived and lives on a sailboat in New Zealand, and the internet coverage there can be pretty spotty, so he thought it would be nice if he could still read what friends were posting while he was offline. Today, Scuttlebutt has around 13,000 identities that we know of. Could be more, probably is more. But there's no central registry, so we don't know. And there are, last I heard, around 200 active users. And that sort of ratio is pretty common for social networks. There's usually only 1% of the people on a social network actually interacting. So the basics of how it works is that every user is only a public-private key pair and an append-only log or a feed. So first, a person publishes a message by hashing the previous message in their log, taking that hash, putting it in the new message, and then signing that message with their private key. So it can remind you of a blockchain, but it's you can think of it, Scuttlebutt, like everyone has their own tiny blockchain, and you don't download all of it. You simply pick the logs from people that you're interested in. Scuttlebutt uses what's called event sourcing. So the state of a user or a person is built up over time on their log. So like here in message, the second message, if I post there that I'm calling myself power source, but later I decide I want to call myself Jacob simply, then when the client goes through the log and thus indexing, it figures out that at the end of the log, my name will be Jacob. So it's a large stack of state that builds up over time. So when you use apps, you only interact with your local database. You never have to fetch stuff from like a server somewhere. But to have stuff in your local database, your client constantly gossips with other people to fill your database. This is easier to explain if we look at this concept of the social graph. So here's you in the middle, and the people in the first circle are the people you follow, and the people in the second circle are the people that the people you follow. All of those people are the people that their logs, you replicate them. Outside of that, you don't care about that. You know that they might exist because you see people linking to them, but you don't actually ask to download it. So that's also why blockchains like Bitcoin can get very, very large, many gigabytes, almost terabytes large. But Scuttlebutt, since you only care about the people closest to you, you can keep it very small. On my computer, it's around 6 gigabytes. 4 of those gigabytes is simply stuff that is 2 of the gigabytes are all of the logs, and then the rest of it is images and other files that are stored outside of the log and can be safely deleted without compromising the security. Scuttlebutt is transport agnostic, so you can exchange messages in any way you like. It's usually done over the internet, but you can do it over local Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, over USB stick. Scuttlebutt is eventually consistent. It's a database term, I believe, which means that it doesn't have some sort of central synchronization, making sure that everyone is up to date. We don't mind if we're a little bit out of date, just because we lost internet for a while. When we get internet or connection to a friend again, we'll get back up to date. The main implementation is written in JavaScript, and the Rust and Go implementations are coming along nicely. So the main reasons why I think Scuttlebutt is important is, first, I think we need to get rid of Facebook. It is based on surveillance capitalism, and I think people generally agree that it's not a great thing. And I think the jury is still out on whether social networks in themselves are a good idea, but I would argue that they can be if you have, if the people developing it have the right incentives. Facebook have the incentive to gather as much data about you as possible and get you as addicted as possible to the app. But Scuttlebutt, since we don't, since it's non-commercial, the developers mostly care about helping their friends have a better time on Scuttlebutt. I also think Scuttlebutt can be good at countering authoritarianism and fascism, since, and I think that's important since that seems to be getting more popular nowadays. I think, yeah, Scuttlebutt can counter that since it is censorship resistant. Your logs are immutable and easily replicatable. And if someone edits anything, yeah, you can verify if someone has edited anything since we use signatures. I also think it can be used for if we end up in a so-called splinternet. A splinternet is a theorized future where every state, for instance, have closed off their internet borders, so to say, and you can only communicate within the country. Or after ecological collapse and infrastructure collapses, if it does, then Scuttlebutt could still be used after that, since it doesn't require internet infrastructure. You can simply communicate, for instance, locally over LAN, and then let the messages spread more naturally. So, can anyone guess what this is? Some people say that the best part of Scuttlebutt is the community. I would almost agree. I really like the protocol as well. This is a pyramid made out of mycelium or fungi, mushrooms, that a guy made. I really like this picture. This is from some forest down in Brazil. There are some Scuttlebutt users there using it to communicate locally over mesh networks. That's a mesh network antenna. They're using a small mesh network in their village, and they really gain by communicating locally instead of going out to the internet for everything, since internet is expensive and slow. So some of the clients. This is Patchwork, sort of the most popular client. It's usually the one that's recommended for new users. This is Patchbay. It's a bit more developer focused. It's easier to experiment with. And it has things, more experimental features or fun features like chess. This is basically correspondence chess. It works perfectly on Scuttlebutt since it's turn-based, and yeah, people used to play it over mail. And yeah. This is Git SSB, so Git over SSB. Instead of pushing your commits to a server somewhere, you push it into the peer-to-peer network. This repository, Patchfoo, another client, only exists on Git SSB. You can't find the source code on GitHub or anywhere. We have gatherings, which is sort of like events or meetups. There is Maniverse, the first mobile client, so far only for Android. It's missing some features, but it's really fun to play around with already. And it has Bluetooth syncing support, which is really cool. Some concepts and philosophy. We have, as well as a technology stack, we have a principles stack. I'll go through this briefly. We value inclusion and pluralism. We really try to ensure diversity in the community as best we can. And I would argue that Scuttlebutt is one of very few decentralization or peer-to-peer technologies you can call feminist. We value independence. Every peer can do whatever it wants. Subjectivity. Every peer has its own view of the network. Some people say that Scuttlebutt isn't one social network. They say that every user has its own social network, since no one looks at the network the same way depending on who they follow. We have near moderation, in that it's not some customer support person sitting in San Francisco doing the moderation for you. It's you and your friends doing the moderation locally, keeping your community a nice place. We have sufficiency in that, as I mentioned before, you don't store the data of everyone on the planet on your computer, only the people you care about and are interested in. We value freedom of speech, But we also have a concept called we call free listening, which you can summarize as that freedom of speech is important, but no one should be forced to listen to someone's bullshit. So Scuttlebutt is non-hierarchical in that every peer works pretty much the same way and has pretty much the same privileges. There's no for instance, in mail, you have people connecting to mail servers, downloading stuff from them, but it's the mail servers that do the main communication. One thing that's the closest thing we have to servers are pubs. They are mostly like regular peers, but they are usually servers sitting somewhere, and they have public IPs. Sometimes they're just regular users with who have fixed public IPs for their computers. These work as sort of because of network address translation, NAT, and things like that, you can't connect to most people by default on the internet. So we solve that by having these public points that people can connect to and gossip with. So if I can't connect to Bob directly, I gossip with this pub, and Bob gossips with this pub or another pub, and then the pubs also gossip with each other. Scuttlebutt is content addressed, meaning that instead of getting files from a specific location, as with the regular web, we instead point to files using the hash of the file. So yeah, this hash link or cipher link points to a post, for instance. Sybil attacks are a kind of common issue in distributed systems, an attack you have to take into consideration when designing it. It basically is the problem where how can you tell that these two people aren't the same person, just having created multiple accounts. So the way that blockchain solves this is by introducing a scarce resource, money. So in the form of transaction fees. I don't know if you can say that Google avoids Sybil attacks, but they use CAPTCHAs and machine learning to avoid spammers. But Scuttlebutt just uses social trust, or a kind of web of trust, to avoid spam. The only way a spammer would get to you is if either you follow the spammer directly, which you hopefully don't, or if one of the people you follow the spammer, which is mostly unlikely to happen. So there's very little trolls or spam. In Scuttlebutt, we try to avoid singletons very much, even more than most peer-to-peer projects. A singleton is a sort of a type of thing that there only exists one of. So for instance, in blockchain, the blockchain is a singleton. There only exists one of it. If there would exist two Bitcoin blockchains, then people call it a fork, and people start discussing which one is the real one. Another thing that is super common in peer-to-peer technology are DHTs. Most projects tend to use it by default, just because it's very useful. A DHT is a sort of global public room where you can announce what files you're interested in, and what files you have. And that way you can find content and people and what content people have. The problem with that, or one of the problems, is that you're announcing to the world what files you're reading, which is pretty bad for privacy. It's also assuming that the person has an internet connection. Without internet, most things that use DHTs tend to fall apart. DHTs also usually require bootstrap nodes, which are sort of the entry points into the DHT, where you find it on the internet. Scuttlebutt doesn't have bootstrap nodes, or barely any. No hard-coded URLs in the source code, pretty much. The closest thing we have are the pubs, but those, if people want to connect to a pub directly, you have to enter it manually. We have private messaging, which is in a pretty unique format, I think, since it is, you publish it on your log, you encrypt the message, put it on your log, you don't tell who it's for. So everyone knows who sent the private message, you, since it's on your log, but no one knows who it's for. So the way people find out who it's for is that when people download your log, if they see a private message, they try to decrypt it. If they manage to decrypt it, then it's for them. If they don't manage to decrypt it, then it's for someone else, and they don't have to care about it. So correlation between who is messaging who is pretty hard, except if people are, for instance, chatting very fast back and forth. But also, since Scuttlebutt is delay tolerant, you could add random delays, for instance, 6 hours between posting a message and actually gossiping it with people, so they don't know exactly who you're talking with. There's a funny edge case in the chess client. I don't know if you saw, but on the side there was a chat, and that's only used in the chess client. And the thing is that the chess messages are public, but the chat messages aren't. But if someone publishes a chess move towards a certain person and then a private message directly after or before, then you can probably guess who they sent the private message to. There's a thing called dark crystal, which is sort of decentralized password recovery. It uses what's called Shamir's secret sharing. Shamir from the S in RSA. It's a cryptographic scheme where you take a secret, for instance, a password, and you say, I want to split this secret up into 5 pieces, and I need, for instance, 3 of these pieces back, any 3 of the 5, to be able to reconstruct the secret. So you send these out. You send these 5 shards out in private messages to friends, and then when you've lost your password, you simply tell your friends, hey, could you send my shards back? And once you then have 3 of the shards back, any of them, you can reconstruct the secret. Having worked with the front end a bit, I've run into some funny user experience pitfalls coming from centralized social networks. There are many things that you just assume that this is the way things work, and you don't really stop to think if you should be putting it into your own clients. Such a thing is, for instance, infinite scrolling. Most websites have that by now, or nowadays. And most Scuttlebutt clients have infinite scrolling, even if most people I talk to tend to agree it's a bad thing. It mostly causes addiction. So then, should we go retro and just use pagination instead? There's also a thing where people tend to compare numbers a lot on social media. It's like, does he have more followers than me? Sort of creating anxiety for a lot of people. They solve this in Patchwork or Patchbay by simply putting a cap on the numbers. If someone has more than 50 followers, you can't see exactly how many it is. You just know that they have a whole bunch of them. There's a paper being released in about sometime in this, September for a conference. This is the closest thing we have to a white paper. It's a good read. You can find it at that cipher link. There's also a longer version with more puns in it. So yeah, some of the future possibilities. So right now, the thing at the top is how it looks right now, the log. You simply, when you publish a message, you simply point to the previous one. But this is very troublesome if right now you download either nothing of a log or the entire log of a user. But sometimes it would be nice to be able to partially replicate a person. So for instance, if I want message 1 and 4, to be able to verify that they are in the same log, I have to be able to find that message 4, I have to be able to verify that the hash in that message pointing to message 3 is correct. So I have to have message 3 as well, and then I have to get message 2 to be able to verify message 3. So I have to get both of those messages to be able to verify that message 4 and 1 are on the same log. And it can, when you have more than 5 messages, you can have thousands of messages, and the replication can slow things down a lot. So then we have a suggested change, where in this format, you still have all of the lengths from 2 to 1, 3 to 2. Some of the arrows are hidden here, so you still have an arrow from 4 to 3. So you still have all of the regular backlinks, but then you have these additional ones, 4 to 1, 13 to 4, and so on. Exactly how they point is based on a fancy algorithm in some paper, but basically how it ends up is that going from, in the previous version, you would have to replicate ordo n, a number of messages to be able to verify, but in the new one you would be able to, I think it's ordo log of n, massively reducing. So for instance, if you have message 11 and you want to download message 40, instead of in the previous version having to download every message between 40 and 11 to verify that they're connected, you simply have to go from 40 down to 13, 12, and then 11. So that's 2 additional messages, which is a lot more efficient. There is a proof of concept implementation of this released just the other day that works on a microcontroller. It's written in Rust, and it doesn't use any heap allocation, which is pretty neat. A few weeks ago, a Linux kernel developer suggested that the Linux kernel development should move to Scuttlebutt or something similar. I think some people were pretty skeptical, but people were still interested, and I look forward to seeing how it develops. MetaMask is a browser extension that lets you interact with the Ethereum blockchain. They are currently developing ways for you to also connect to Scuttlebutt through MetaMask. So when you want to store, for instance, a large file or a log of items, but you can't afford to store it on Ethereum directly, they're thinking that you can store it on Scuttlebutt and then link to Scuttlebutt from Ethereum. Private groups are also coming along nicely. They're the most requested feature, and I think a lot of people, a lot of people require this to be able to switch away from, for instance, Facebook. Having a peer-to-peer wiki would be really cool. There are some attempts to implement it. So far, we have a bit of a hack where there is one message type that already is editable by anyone, and that is the gatherings that I mentioned before. So some people have started using gatherings as a sort of makeshift wiki. So this is a wiki page where we list research papers, but then there are also 23 people attending the wiki page, which I don't think Wikipedia has that feature. Peer invites is a thing we're currently implementing that would solve a bunch of problems. Currently, when people want to join Scuttlebutt and they want to do it over the internet, the way they have to do it is find a pub that is giving out. The way you connect a pub is by using an invite code, and some pubs are giving out free invite codes, basically, which is kind of nice because, you get a lot of interesting strangers that way. But the problem is when some of these pubs stay up for a bit too long. When a person uses an invite, the pub follows the person. I checked a few weeks ago, and one of the pubs was following like 2,500 people, and that is a lot of people. So when someone joins the pub, they also follow the pub, and so it ends up being so that when a person joins, they start downloading all the 2,500 people instantly, and they can be anyone. Some of them are literally bots, just posting spam, and it, when a server or a pub follows this many people, it makes the social graph concept fall apart. So our suggested solution for this is peer invites, where the pubs are still there, but the only thing the pub would do is help you find your friend. So person A generates a peer invite, gives it to their friend, and tells the pub about it. Then the friend uses the invite at the pub. The pub helps the friend to start gossiping and getting messages from the network, but the pub doesn't follow the person, and the person doesn't follow the pub. It's only person A and person B that start to follow each other. And so the social graph remains sane. Thank you. That's all I had. Questions would be, yeah.
Thanks a lot. Are there any questions?
So 2 years ago, when I looked at Scuttlebutt, there was this problem that you couldn't use like the same ID for two clients. So you couldn't like have a Scuttlebutt on your laptop and on your phone. Has that been solved?
No, it's being worked on, but it's we have a lot of things we work on, and it's a work in progress. But I don't know when it will be solved.
where are the logs stored? Is stored on your phone, for example?
Yeah.
Yeah. So and if a person sends an image to another person, that will be in the log, wouldn't it?
No, large files like images are stored outside of the log, and then you point to the image using a hash link. Your log entries are limited to, I think, 8 kilobytes, so you have to keep them pretty small. Yeah, so you use a link to point out to the image separately.
Where are the images stored? On a server or somewhere?
It's all on your computer. So when your friend wants to, the friend simply downloads it from your computer or from a pub.
Okay, then, thank you very much for your talk.